Good morning. Thank you for joining the Nevada Housing Data post-COVID-19. My name is Dylan Keith, Policy Analyst at the Vegas Chamber. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some features of this call. If you're using the desktop or mobile Zoom applications, you may ask a question at any time using the question pane at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Likewise, you may also use the hand raise button. As we open up for questions, we will call your name and unmute your line. Please ensure you are unmuted on your end, and please keep questions brief so we can get to as many as possible. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Beth Sewald.
Thank you so much, Dylan. I appreciate your time today. Good morning, everybody. I'm Beth Sewald, of course, with the Vegas Chamber, and we want to thank you for joining our teleconference today with the Zillow Group. We're very excited to have our guest today. During our conversation today, our goal is to truly learn the latest information about the current state of the residential real estate market in Las Vegas and the whole state for that matter, and what the future of the housing market will potentially look like post-COVID-19. I also want to thank our sponsors today for their SCE Federal Credit Union, and then of course the UNLV Executive MBA program, because without them, without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring you great programming like this. Also want to take just a moment to highlight a couple of the events and programs that the Chamber has coming up. First, as we're heading into the new year, we really want to encourage folks to take advantage of the Vegas Chamber's free life coaching program to help you set goals for 2021. That's a program that's through our U.S. Bank Coaching and Growth Center. You can work with a professional life coach to develop your personal or professional goals and set a plan to achieve them. The best part about that is that it's completely free, and they don't necessarily talk to you about your banking needs whatsoever. So it's all about life and goals coaching. So we definitely encourage you to take care of that, or to take advantage of that, I should say. Also tomorrow, the Vegas Chamber is going to be hosting a post-election webinar. You're not going to want to miss that. We'll be welcoming former Congressman John Porter from the Porter Group, and also Jim and Jesse Wadhams. And they're going to give us some insights into what could possibly lie ahead for 2021. Even though nobody has a crystal ball, we wish they did, but they're going to give us an update on both the state and the federal levels and how the election is going to be affecting all of us to the degree that they can. That's going to be from 8:30 to 9:30 tomorrow. And so you can sign up on the Vegas Chamber's website for that. And last, you don't want to miss our annual installation luncheon. That's happening on Thursday, December 10th. You're going to want to hear what's ahead for the Vegas Chamber from our new chairwoman, Gina Bonjovi, and you'll also get a chance to meet the new trustees for 2021. So we're really excited about that. And now, everybody, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today from Zillow, Mr. Jarryd Davis and Alexandra Lee. Jarryd is the Government Relations and Public Affairs Manager of the Zillow Group, which is one of the largest online realty companies in the entire world. Jarryd has a demonstrated track record of effectively representing technology, business interests before lawmakers and regulators, as well as being very versed at navigating the regulatory and political waters for emerging startups within the transportation, technology, real estate, and public policy arenas. So before his time at Zillow, Jarryd was the Director of Public Policy at Booster Fuels and was the Regulatory Affairs Manager of Uber. So Jarryd, you have a great background. You have a lot of knowledge. I know you're going to introduce Alexandra for us today. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having us, Beth. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate the invitation from you and the Chamber to sit down this morning and share some of the data that we have at Zillow about Southern Nevada's housing market. So as Beth said, my name is Jarryd Davis. I cover government relations and public affairs for Zillow Group in the state of Nevada. And before we dig into some of those Zillow data and trends that we're seeing about Nevada and the Southern Nevada housing market in particular, I thought it'd be helpful to first, just provide some background on Zillow and also share some details about our local Las Vegas operation in Clark County. So since Zillow's founding in 2006, we've really been centered around this notion that data is powerful, particularly when it comes to transactions as large and impactful as finding a place where you will call home. We know the consumers need good data to make informed housing decisions, so we've made it mission critical to our business to have detailed data and information readily available across all of our sites and platforms. And really, we've believed since day one that with increased information and transparency, this helps everyone find a home easier, faster, and with less barriers in place. So fast forward to today, almost 15 years later, and Zillow now holds data on over 110 million properties nationwide, with site traffic numbering around 200 million unique visitors per month, helping to make us the world's largest online real estate marketplace. Locally, we operate Zillow's home buying and selling platform, Zillow Offers, in the Las Vegas metro region. Zillow Offers enables Vegas sellers to request an offer from Zillow, allowing the consumer to sell their home quickly and seamlessly directly to us, skipping things like open houses, managing home repairs themselves, or other stresses that typically accompany selling your home. In Clark County, we have a full team of around 12 full-time folks based out of our Summerlin office. These are the folks that power Zillow Offers and run our local operation in Clark County. And really, Zillow Offers made Las Vegas our second market to pilot and try out the home buying and selling feature as early as the summer of 2018. So we've been really proud to have a corporate footprint in the Clark County region, and we're excited to continue to work with stakeholders like the Vegas Chamber to highlight some of the trends and data that we're seeing in Southern Nevada's housing market. And really, we think that that's some of what sets Zillow apart from other innovators in the real estate industry. It is our commitment to sharing data that empowers everyone from consumers to elected lawmakers. And in the light of current economic and public health crises that are going on around the country right now, we think it's important. So we've shared this data and analyses with a host of stakeholders, from US Congress to state legislators to local housing authorities, to share with them some of the data and analyses around how COVID-19 has or could affect local housing markets. We think that the role we play as a technology company at the intersection of technology and housing really compels us to share this data and share that we have everything from housing complexities to consumer behavior to just broader real estate trends, which is what we hope to accomplish with today's discussion. At this point, I'll share a brief bio of my colleague, Alexandra, and then I'd love to turn things over to her so she can walk through today's presentation and detail some of the data that we're seeing. Alexandra is an economist on Zillow's economic research team, and she's based out of San Francisco. She uses data and economic analyses to better understand and answer questions about the housing market, with a particular focus about how policy at local to the state level can affect local housing markets. She holds her bachelor's degree in economics and political science from the University of Chicago. So with that, I'll formally turn things over to Alexandra, who can walk through some of the data and key findings that we're seeing around the metro region. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Jarryd, and thanks again to the Vegas Chamber for having us. I'm going to take a second to share my screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Was going to happen, right?
We'll see if we can't fix that. Between Dylan and I, we'll work on it while you're chatting, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as Jarryd mentioned, we've really turned here on the Zillow Econ team to look at our data and try to slice it and dice it at a more granular level to try to understand the housing market a little bit better, especially understanding, these are unprecedented times, these are unpredictable times. So what can the data really tell us about what's happening? Let me see if I can. Oh, okay, great. All right. So just to jump right in, this big story in Las Vegas and really a lot of metros across the US is that the housing market is hot. There are more buyers than sellers in the market. And we can see that dynamic play out in these two metrics here. New for sale inventory, so the number of new listings that are hitting the market every week, and newly pending listings, so those listings that are taken off the market going into pending. And these represent seller and buyer activity respectively. So you can see here that new for sale inventory and newly pending listings both plummeted as stay-at-home orders took hold in March and April. But as the market started to regain its footing in June and July, both pendings and new for sale inventory increased. But those new for sale inventory levels were inconsistent. And in the last few months, we've actually seen them drop back down while pendings remained high. So as of late October, new for sale inventory is actually lower than last year by about 7%, while newly pending listings are up over last year about 18%. So we see this as evidence of the pent-up demand on the buyer side. We already knew that there was a large wave of millennials that are aging into their home buying years. So we were actually expecting a strong home buying season coming into this spring. Obviously, that was all put on pause when coronavirus hit. But as the reopening happened, we believe that there was this pent-up demand already there. But beyond these buyers that were sort of waiting in the wings already, there are likely even more people that weren't planning to buy or weren't planning to buy so soon, but this new reality has really changed their housing preferences. Perhaps they're seeking more space to work from home now, or cheaper housing costs if they've lost income. And all this demand is being met with a very favorable mortgage environment. Rates are at an all-time low right now. But think about sellers on the other side. Sellers aren't back at the same levels. And there's a few reasons for that. So for one, most sellers are also buyers, right? They're usually trading up for that next home. And with the market so competitive right now, it might not make sense to join the fray. And with economic conditions as precarious as they are, you're not sure if your paycheck is going to come through next month or the month after. Stretching and going for that more expensive home just might not make the most sense for you right now. So we're probably seeing a lot of sellers maybe just sitting back and letting things ride out for the time being. But all that means that despite the pandemic, despite the economic downturn, home buying is as competitive as ever. So buyers right now are faced with high prices and low inventory. So here we see a comparison of list prices and inventory this year in that sort of gold-orange line and last year in blue. So apart from a drop in list prices during the earlier days of the lockdown, prices have continued to rise, and they're currently sitting at levels higher than this time last year. So that's evidence that the usual home buying season has been delayed and prolonged. And with those high prices is extremely low inventory, as we just talked about, right? We never really recovered from that sharp drop in March. So while inventory climbed up to a peak in about early July, it's only fallen again, and it's sitting at record low levels. So as we talked about earlier, buyers are snapping up homes at a faster pace than sellers are putting them up. And note here that the composition of inventory affects listing prices. So when those listing prices dropped in March, it was because listings of the most expensive homes got pulled from the market. And now with rising prices, it's those same expensive listings that are coming back. And even looking at home values as a whole, so not just prices of homes currently on the market, but homes overall, we're seeing that those home values are growing steadily. In fact, home values are growing even faster now than they were before the pandemic. So if you look at February, home values were relatively stable. They were growing at a rate of 1% year over year. And that was following a cool down in 2019 from the double-digit growth in 2018. But now, home values are picking up the pace again, and it was clocking in at about 6% year over year last month. But that was all the for sale side, right? Rental markets, though, operate under different dynamics. Rental listings represent a vacant unit, and landlords usually can't afford to just wait for better market conditions to list their unit, unlike sellers who can typically just live in their home for a little longer until listing. And we also know that it's renters that have been particularly impacted by this pandemic compared to homeowners. We know that it's lower income workers, individuals working in service industry jobs in particular, that were hit hardest by job loss. And it's those lower income workers that are much more likely to rent than own. So when these individuals have to pursue affordability maneuvers like doubling up or, moving back in with family, those vacant units represent more supply that landlords have to find some way to entice renters to fill, and that means price cuts. So we've actually seen here in Las Vegas that the rental market here has really followed the trajectory of shutdowns and reopening. So rent growth took a sharp downturn in March, plummeting to a low point in June. But then starting in July, rents sort of surged back upwards, landing at about 4% year-over-year growth over this last month, which was about where growth was at before the pandemic. But this upward surge shouldn't be viewed as a sort of rosy recovery, right? These trends on both the for sale and rental side of the housing market are obscuring a lot of the economic pain that people are feeling. In fact, the market might actually look a lot more bleak than it does right now without the economic assistance that the CARES Act offered this summer. So it's important to note how necessary these assistance measures were to the lower income households most likely to face joblessness. Just to recap, the CARES Act provided unprecedented levels of assistance. So that it was $2 trillion of aid with direct cash payments and an extra $600 a week of unemployment. But, that extra unemployment assistance ended a few months ago. But here in this analysis, we looked at households among those whose income mostly comes from these highly impacted industries, so food, arts, and retail. And these are generally lower income households. And even during normal times, about a third of these households are housing burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income towards housing. But, we looked at these households and projected out the scenario in which those household members working in these impacted industries lost their jobs. So without their incomes, what happens to the household's rent burden? And as you can imagine, losing that chunk of income is really devastating. The share of rent-burdened households jumps from about a third to over 3/4. But of course, most unemployed workers receive unemployment. But with just state-level unemployment, the share of rent-burdened households drops to about 65%. But it was that extra $600 a week that really helped these households, dropping the rent burden share to just 20%. But unfortunately, the federal government has been at a standstill in deciding further assistance measures. And really each month that passes presents a growing burden on these households that are really hurting. But all right, taking a step back from the pandemic, even looking at a long view, we know that renters have been struggling with affordability in a way that homeowners haven't. So in recent years, renters have faced steadily deteriorating affordability, right? That share of income spent on housing steadily increasing. And on the other hand, buying a home in comparison is becoming a more affordable endeavor. And that's due to a few things. So renter incomes just aren't keeping pace with rising rents. In fact, they've been falling in recent years, while on the other hand, owner incomes, which are already higher, have also grown at a pace comparable to home values. On top of that, we've already mentioned historically low mortgage rates. So that's been an added boon for home buyers as well, so shrinking their monthly mortgage payments. But what this means is that we're left with a situation where the gap between renting and owning is becoming increasingly difficult to bridge. So while owning a home represents more and more benefits, renting a home likely means that you're falling further and further into a deeper housing burden. So it's on this context that we think about the current economic situation, right? Where this is already an added layer of difficulty for renters on what was already an increasingly tough situation for them. Oops. So now remember that we're already seeing rent burdens in Las Vegas reach about a third of renter incomes. And you might be familiar with that 30% threshold as the recommended limit for housing burdens. But in our research, we found that that threshold isn't just purely hypothetical. It represents an actual turning point in the relationship between rising rents and homelessness. So we found that after rent burdens exceed 32%, the relationship between rent growth and homelessness strengthens. So that 32% is actually an important inflection point for communities to be aware of. And because of that level of rent unaffordability in Las Vegas, there's actually a strong relationship between rising rents and homelessness. So here we estimate that for every 1 percentage point increase in the median valued rental, 9 more people are predicted to experience homelessness. And I just want to take a beat here to say, you know, our team talks all the time about rising prices, year-over-year trends, percentage point increases, but it's important to always remember the human toll that those numbers represent, right? 1 percentage point increase might not sound like much of a change, but it can mean the difference between having a roof over your head for several families. And that's all to say that, you know, our econ team really understands how important housing data is. And as Jarryd already mentioned, we really hope to make relationships with local stakeholders like yourselves to make sure that data is available to you to help you make the best housing decisions for your communities. And that's all I have for today. I can turn it back to Mary Beth to moderate, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. That was fascinating. And for our viewers watching, just to confirm and clarify, these are mostly nationwide numbers. I know you did speak to Las Vegas a little bit.
Right. These were Vegas metro specific numbers,
Okay.
Unless otherwise noted.
Gotcha. Okay. Vegas numbers. Very interesting. And one other thing, could you clarify, please? You were talking about the rent burden if it exceeds 32%. Could you give us a little more flavor about how you mean that, what that slide meant?
Sure. So that was based on a nationwide analysis. But generally, the relationship we found between rising rents and homelessness, it was at 2 sort of inflection points. And I can turn back to the slide. So you'll see 22% and 32% were sort of crucial inflection points where the relationship between rents and homelessness really increases after those 2 levels.
Okay, great. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, and we really encourage everyone to send us your questions. One of them is, you mentioned support from the CARES Act providing support to renters that resulted in what could be an overly optimistic picture of the rental market. Can you briefly describe what the results could be if we do not see an additional relief bill in 2021? As you know, we're watching very closely a CARES Act 4th package.
Right. You know, I think the $1 million question is exactly how many households are facing eviction, right? And that's a difficult question to answer. But what we know at the very least is that housing insecurity will definitely increase, right? Households are definitely having trouble and difficulty meeting their housing payments. So, you know, while a wave of evictions might be a worst case scenario and it might not actually pan out, you know, even without evictions, we know that there's a lot of economic pain being felt by these households.
Well, and homelessness is a huge problem in Southern Nevada. It is in Northern Nevada, but worse in Southern Nevada. So, so what you're telling us today is that these numbers could have an increasingly challenging impact on those homeless numbers in the state. Yeah,
well, so we did find that we talked about the relationship between rising rents and homelessness, right? But of course, homelessness can also happen during downturns, you know, as people lose their jobs, lose their homes. So that's something to keep in mind as well, definitely.
Okay. Again, we encourage everybody to ask questions. We're getting a few here as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the residential buyer and the seller? You talked about the different demand levels. You know, fewer folks are wanting to sell right now. But what would you say are the most important things that they need to know in this particular market, because it is different?
Yeah, I mean, I think buying a home is a personal decision, right? Everyone that's hitting the market right now is probably making a very personal decision, and it's a time to buy no matter you know, how sort of competitive the environment is. But, you know, once you've made that decision to buy, I think it's important to keep in mind how competitive things are, you know, to a degree that it hasn't been the case for a while, right? It's inventory that's even lower than last year. It's prices that are even higher than last year. We're seeing homes really snapped off the market at record paces. So, you might, be in for a bit of a search, for a bit of a difficult search, as a lot of buyers are hitting the market.
What are y'all seeing in the way of the difference in sales in supply and demand for existing home and new homes?
Yeah, so that's actually not data we have on hand. We know that there's strong demand just from our surveys for new construction, but we haven't been able to look at metrics like I've broken out earlier by new homes versus existing, unfortunately.
Okay. Another question we've gotten, given everything that you've just recently talked about, do you think there's a need for us to look at how we approach zoning for multifamily rental properties and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, so that's research we've spoken to in a few ways, right? So we have looked at the ability of modest densification to really add a lot of housing stock to any metro, right? So it doesn't have to look like, it doesn't have to change the landscape of neighborhoods all that much to add a lot of housing stock. And we know that adding housing stock is important, right? The inventory is low, but that's just part of the picture. It's been low for a long time, and that's creating a situation where prices are continuing to rise up and up. So to the degree that zoning can change to add new housing, that's something that we believe is really important.
Yeah, and I'll actually weigh in on that too real quickly, Mary Beth, because I think that's an important point for Nevada to focus on in particular. I mean, we've seen, Alexandra and I are both based in San Francisco, and there is no shortage of headlines about how unaffordable the Bay Area is, the rising homeless population, and this is, we're seeing this play out in large metros in places like Los Angeles and Seattle as well, right? So I think Nevada and Las Vegas in particular is at a critical junction right now, right? Where you look at long-term growth and planning and what kind of levers can you guys pull from a local or state perspective that will help the growth for more housing. And that's housing across the board, from affordable to market rate, right? Because we know that, as Alex just outlined, there are communities like Las Vegas, when you start to creep above that 32% threshold where folks are spending on their monthly housing income, that relationship with homelessness starts to rise pretty dramatically. So really heed the lessons of some of these other coastal metros that have gone before that are really struggling now in both affordability and homelessness. And I think zoning reform or new tweaks to zoning, both at the local level all the way up to the state, could be useful in this dialogue as the state and Clark County starts to forecast long term about the growth and the homelessness population and other concerns around affordability more broadly.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Jarryd and Alexandra. It's something that is of great concern here in Nevada as we, especially from a chamber standpoint, as we monitor the economy and we try to reskill and upskill our workers to get folks back to work. And then we work on the talent pipeline and keeping our businesses open and our employers working. There's definitely a correlation between all of those things. So I really appreciate you, explaining that. There was also a report that out this week that highlighted an increased demand for multi-generational housing, especially now, right, among buyers during this pandemic. Do you guys see this as a pandemic-specific trend, or do you think this trend is likely to continue after well beyond any recovery that hopefully we'll see?
I think that's hard to say, and unfortunately don't know the exact report you're mentioning, but we knew that multi-generational housing was already a popular housing choice for certain groups, certain races, ethnicities, and that's a personal choice. And maybe that personal choice is changing for a broader group of people now that we're in this new environment where being close to family is important. I think that's just something that we'll have to keep tabs on going forward, but we'll see.
Okay, very good. From the data that you all have regarding, Las Vegas or the entire state or the country, Are there any success stories you see that Las Vegas could be looking to in terms of housing affordability and availability? Success stories?
In terms of other areas
Yeah.
in the nation? Yeah, I mean, I think there are, in the last few years, we've seen a sort of surge in popularity embracing upzoning principles, right? So Minneapolis for sure, Portland, and it's something that has been talked about in California. And unfortunately, policy change is slow in terms of seeing the effects. So I think it's important to keep track of how these various policy measures are doing in terms of their actual impacts of, increasing housing construction. But, just upzoning alone isn't enough, right? We have to make the entire process of building streamlined and easier. So, other considerations that still make housing construction difficult, other constraints like, parking requirements, setbacks, stuff like that. It's important to keep in mind as well.
Jarryd, I saw you reacting there. Did you have some comments you wanted to add to what Alexandra said?
Sure. Yeah, I think this really just ties back to some of the other comments around zoning reforms, right? I think that given the juncture that the state of Nevada and Las Vegas is at in particular in this trajectory around growth and around housing in particular, it'd be very wise for stakeholders and decision makers in the government to try and, do all sorts of things, right? As Alexandra just outlined, it's not just parking requirements, it's not just upzoning. I mean, there's a variety of different kind of levers that could be pulled that could actually really lead to impactful change. And again, like I mentioned, it's really just more housing production, period, right? Which there are regulatory concerns there are environmental, there are labor, there are a lot of different sort of overlapping issues that I think local stakeholders really would behoove them to try and wrap their heads around this now, as Las Vegas and Nevada is really in the early stages of confronting this affordability crisis before it reaches places like the level of like a Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seattle, right? Which it has really overtaken planning and has started, I believe, as a resident, to impact negatively, unfortunately, homeowners and certainly blocking existing or certain folks from gaining access to home ownership, which we know long term has a real impact economically speaking for how one or families accumulate wealth and build wealth, right? And how that passes down and how that speaks to the overall economic health of a community or a metro region. And so again, I do think there are a lot of different kind of levers that could be pulled, and now is the right time to do that. So as we've stated throughout this presentation and discussion, to the extent that it's useful or helpful, Zillow's data and expertise and analysis around, housing policy, zoning reform, affordable housing, the impact of policy to local housing markets, to the extent that that can be useful to local dialogue, we're happy to share, because I do think that there is a story that can be told about other cities that have gone before this and gone before Las Vegas that really could, change the trajectory of what we're seeing from an affordability perspective.
Well, thank you so much for offering those resources. We are absolutely going to take you up on that. And I want to thank again Jarryd Davis and Alexandra Lee for joining us from Zillow today for this very informative webinar. And we'll have you back. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. We appreciate it. If anyone has questions or follow-up, we can also make the presentation deck that Alexandra delivered available to members as well, if that's of interest for anyone.
Oh, excellent. We would love to have that. So I'll just answer that question now and say yes. Thank you.
Great. We'll make sure to follow up then.
Okay, thanks again. I also want to thank our exclusive sponsors once again for their support, SCE Federal Credit Union, and of course the UNLV Executive MBA program. We couldn't do these webinars without them. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for your membership at the Vegas Chamber, and please reach out to us if there's ever anything we can do for you. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.